My name is Sarah, and if you looked at my life from the outside, you'd think it was a fairy tale. I had just married Tom, a charismatic and loving man. I was also a proud mother to Lily, my 9-year-old daughter from a previous marriage. She was the light of my life, the kind of child who would make anyone want to be a parent. Our wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives, the starting point for our blended family. We decided on a charming venue, a beautiful garden filled with roses, lilies, and daisies. The weather was perfect. The sun was shining, and the whole place was filled with our friends and family, except for one person who seemed hell-bent on ruining the day. Helen, my new mother-in-law. Sarah, you look stunning, Tom whispered as we exchanged our vows, his eyes filled with genuine affection. Thank you. You're not too bad yourself, I replied, giggling softly. The ceremony went off without a hitch. The sunlight seemed to bless our union, casting a golden glow on everyone and everything. But as I looked into the crowd, I saw Helen's face. Her lips curled into a sardonic smile, as if challenging my happiness. At the reception, Helen was nowhere to be found initially. Maybe she left, I thought, trying to stay optimistic. But then the toasts began. My best friend, Emily, stood up and said wonderful things about Tom and me. Tom's best man, Mark, followed suit. And then, before I knew it, Helen had grabbed the microphone. Well, she started, her voice dripping with sarcasm. What a joyous occasion this is. My son is finally married. She paused, scanning the crowd before locking eyes with me. I always thought Tom would end up with someone a bit more sophisticated. But love is indeed blind, and sometimes you have to settle for what life throws your way. The room went silent, the atmosphere growing thick and uncomfortable. Tom cleared his throat and took the mic from Helen. Thanks, Mom. I appreciate your unique way of wishing us well. Let's continue celebrating, shall we? People applauded hesitantly, trying to shake off the awkwardness that Helen had just injected into our special day. Tom leaned over to me, his eyes filled with regret. I'm so sorry about my mother. She's always been this way. Please don't take her words to heart, he said. I tried to smile, to show that I was unbothered, but deep down I felt a stab of worry. Was this a sign of things to come? Would Helen continue to interfere in our lives, leaving a dark cloud over our family? I won't let her ruin this for us, I told myself. But as I glanced one more time at Helen, who was now quietly conversing with a group of relatives, her eyes met mine, and in that moment, I knew that this was far from over. The battle lines were drawn, not just for the day, but perhaps for the foreseeable future. Yet, I also knew that I had Tom and Lily by my side. I wasn't going to let anyone tarnish the joy and love we had fought so hard to find. And so, with a mixture of happiness and foreboding, we concluded our wedding day. The celebrations continued, the cake was cut, and the dance floor filled up. But amid the laughter and cheers, I couldn't shake off the feeling that this was merely the opening act in a drama that was set to unfold. I didn't know then just how right I was. After the unsettling drama at the wedding, Tom and I were more than eager to start our new life together. The house we bought was a beautiful 2-story suburban dwelling, spacious enough for the 3 of us. Lily was thrilled. She finally had a room big enough to house all her books, toys, and dreams. The day we moved in, the weather was pleasant, neither too hot nor too cold. A good omen, I thought. I can't believe this is our home, Mom, Lily exclaimed, her eyes wide with excitement as she twirled around her new room. I know, sweetheart. It's a new beginning for all of us, I replied, holding back tears of joy. Tom was just as excited, maybe more so. He'd always wanted to be a homeowner, to build something lasting. Can you believe it? Sarah, our own place, our sanctuary, he said, wrapping his arms around me as we stood in the middle of the empty living room. It's incredible, Tom. I feel like we're living a dream, I responded, feeling the warmth of his body against mine. Yet, amidst all the excitement and happiness, there was a part of me that couldn't forget Helen's words at our wedding. Tom sensed my hesitation. Hey, what's wrong? You seem a bit off, he questioned, his brow furrowing with concern. I'm just worried about your mother. Do you think she'll ever accept me? I finally confessed. Tom sighed, looking conflicted. Sarah, my mom is complicated. She has her own way of seeing things. But we're a family now, and that's what matters. For a while, things seemed ideal. Tom started his new job. Lily adapted well to her new school, and I was busy turning our new house into a home. We were settling into a routine. We were happy, But then Helen started visiting. At first, her visits were intermittent, spaced out enough that they felt like minor disturbances in an otherwise serene life. However, each visit was a replay of the negative energy she had exuded at our wedding. Her eyes would scan our home as if looking for flaws, for cracks in the facade of our happiness. "Oh, you chose beige for the walls," she remarked during her first visit, a tone of disdain clearly audible. "Very. Safe. It's a neutral color. Goes well with everything," Tom countered, attempting to diffuse the situation. But Helen wasn't one to be easily deterred. "And these curtains, they're lovely if you're going for that shabby, chic aesthetic," she added, running the fabric through her fingers with an air of condescension. Tom glanced at me, his eyes almost pleading for patience. "Well, Mom, we like them. That's what matters, right?" It was hard to ignore the tension that had seeped into the room. As Helen continued to eye every choice we'd made, every piece of furniture we'd bought, and every decor item we'd selected, I felt increasingly defensive, almost as if our home was under some kind of judgmental scrutiny. But as uncomfortable as it was, there was also a sense of resolve building within me. I was determined to protect my family's happiness, even if that meant standing up to a force as dominating as Helen. "Let's hope you grow to love it as much as we do," I said, trying to smile, although my lips felt rigid. Helen looked at me and then at Tom. "Yes, let's hope," she echoed, her voice tinged with a cynicism that made me shudder. As she left, Tom held me close, whispering, "Don't worry about her, Sarah. We'll get through this." But as I stood there, embraced by the man I loved in the house we'd chosen, I couldn't shake off a nagging feeling of unease. "We'll get through this," I repeated to myself, knowing that the road ahead was bound to be anything but smooth. Life settled into a rhythm after Helen's first few visits. I was gradually learning to thicken my skin against her barbs and subtle jabs. Tom was supportive, increasingly so. He'd started noticing his mother's behavior and was growing weary of it, often confronting her in my defense. "Mom, if you don't have anything nice to say, maybe it's better not to say anything at all," he'd suggest, his tone edged with frustration. But it was Lily who would unknowingly throw our seemingly calm life into chaos. One evening, she came to me, her eyes filled with concern and confusion. "Mom, I think someone took money from my savings jar." My heart sank. Lily had been saving up her allowance for months, keeping it in a cute little jar she decorated herself. "How much is missing, sweetie?" "I had about $1,000, but now there's only around 500 left," she said, her voice quivering. My mind started racing. Who could have done such a thing? I questioned Tom about it when he got home from work. "Tom, have you seen Lily's savings jar recently? Half the money is gone." Tom's face turned a shade paler. "No, I haven't touched it." "Why would I? That's Lily's hard-earned money." He was right. Of course, Tom had no reason to take Lily's savings, but I had to ask, "Do you think your mother might know something about this?" The very suggestion seemed to hurt him. "Sarah, I know she's difficult, but accusing her of theft is a serious matter." I know, but we have to do something," I insisted. Tom's face turned serious. "We should keep an eye out, maybe set up some cameras, just to be sure." So we did. We discreetly installed CCTV cameras near the area where Lily kept her savings jar, just in case. I hated the idea of spying on our own family, but what choice did we have? A week passed, and then Helen announced another of her impromptu visits. This time, though, she seemed different, more cheerful and seemingly kind-hearted than she'd ever been before. I couldn't put my finger on it, but her sudden change in demeanor made me feel uneasy. "Sarah, dear, how lovely to see you," she exclaimed upon entering, her voice unnaturally high, pitched. "And Lily, you're growing so fast." "Hi, Grandma," Lily replied cautiously, picking up on the tension that had always existed but never been openly acknowledged. At one point during her visit, Helen excused herself to use the restroom, disappearing down the hallway. When she returned, she seemed even happier, if that were possible. "Ah, much better," she sighed, rejoining us in the living room. "I'm afraid I must go now. Responsibilities and all." She hugged Lily and Tom, but when she got to me, she paused. "Take care, Sarah. We're family now, after all." Her words sent chills down my spine. Something wasn't right, and as soon as she left, I knew I had to check the CCTV footage. "We'll be right back, Lily," I told my daughter, my eyes meeting Tom's. We both knew this was a moment of truth that could either dissolve our fears or confirm them. We reviewed the footage, and there it was, clear as day. Helen had taken the money from Lily's jar. I felt a mixture of anger, betrayal, and sadness wash over me. How could she? Tom sat there, his eyes filled with disbelief. "I can't believe she would do this. Sarah, this is criminal." "Yes, it is. And we have to do something about it," I said, my voice firm and resolute. Tom nodded, his face hardened by the betrayal he'd just witnessed. "You're right. We'll have to take this to court." And just like that, any remaining veil of courtesy and familial decorum was lifted. Helen had crossed a line, betraying not just me, but her own son and granddaughter. What happened next would forever alter the dynamics of our already fractured family. I couldn't sleep that night. The footage replaying in my mind had turned my stomach into a knot of anger and disbelief. Tom, too, was visibly restless. He kept pacing around our bedroom, his face etched with confusion and hurt. "I just can't believe it. Sarah, that's my mother we're talking about. My own mother stealing from my family," he said, stopping to look at me. "I know, Tom. It's awful, but we can't let her get away with it. Think about Lily. We need to protect her." He nodded solemnly. "You're right. We have to set a trap." The next day, Tom called Helen and invited her over for what we decided to label as a family meeting. Of course, Helen suspected nothing and agreed to come. Meanwhile, we prepared the evidence, making copies of the CCTV footage and gathering bank statements as additional proof of Lily's savings. As much as it pained me, setting this trap was a necessary evil. The afternoon sun was beginning to set when Helen arrived. She seemed slightly wary, but nonetheless walked in with her usual air of superiority. "Thank you for coming, Mom," Tom began, offering her a seat. "We've called this family meeting for a very serious reason." Helen looked puzzled. "A family meeting? That sounds dire." "Yes, it is," I interjected, my voice steady. "We need to talk about Lily's missing savings." Helen's eyes widened, but only for a second. She recovered quickly, her expression reverting back to the unreadable mask she often wore. "What do you mean, missing savings?" I pulled out my phone and connected it to the TV. "We have video footage that might interest you," I said, hitting play. The screen lit up, displaying the incriminating evidence. There was Helen, clearly visible, taking money out of Lily's jar. As the video ended, an unsettling silence filled the room. Helen's face turned a shade of red I'd never seen before. "How dare you spy on me? In my own son's home," she finally burst out. "Your own son's home where you stole from your own granddaughter," Tom shot back, his voice tinged with disgust. "We're going to court," I added, unable to contain my anger any longer, "and you will pay back every single dollar you stole from Lily." Helen seemed to shrink in her chair, her eyes darting from me to Tom and then to the floor. "You can't do this. You can't ruin me." "It's not us who did the ruining," Tom retorted. "It was always you. You ruin yourself by betraying your family." Helen seemed lost for words. She finally stood up, her face flushed with a mixture of shame and anger. "I'll see you in court then," she said, before hastily leaving our home. As soon as she was gone, Tom sank into a chair, his face in his hands. "I can't believe it has come to this," he muttered. "We did what we had to do, Tom," I reassured him, taking his hand. "For Lily, for us. We're a family, and we need to protect each other." Tom looked up, his eyes meeting mine. "You're right, Sarah. We're a family, and that's what families do. They stick together against all odds." And so, the trap had been set and sprung. The wheels were in motion for a court case that would either vindicate us or lead us down an even more complicated path. But whatever the outcome, one thing was certain. Our family would never be the same again. The courtroom was cold, both in temperature and atmosphere. The wooden benches were hard and uninviting, just like the situation we found ourselves in. Tom, Lily, and I sat on one side, while Helen was isolated on the other, with only her lawyer for company. "This is the state fees. Helen Williams," the judge announced, flipping through the pages in front of him. "Theft from a minor. How do you plead?" Helen's voice trembled as she spoke. "Not guilty, Your Honor." I felt a wave of disbelief wash over me. How could she deny it? especially when confronted with irrefutable evidence. Tom clenched his fists, visibly holding back his emotions. Lily was too young to fully understand the gravity of the situation, but she knew something significant was happening. Our lawyer presented our case, outlining each incident leading up to the theft and ultimately displaying the CCTV footage for the court to see. As the video played, I looked at Helen. Her face was a mixture of guilt and defiance. It was hard to reconcile this woman with the same one who had so nastily critiqued my wedding dress, who pretended to be family. The defense made their case, trying to paint Helen as a misunderstood elderly woman who had been framed by a daughter-in-law, resentful of her well-intentioned criticisms. Their argument was weak, built on shaky ground, and I felt hopeful. Finally, the judge spoke. "Mrs. Williams, would you like to make a statement before we proceed?" Helen rose, her eyes darting around the room before settling on me. "Yes, Your Honor. I want to say that family matters should be resolved within the family. Dragging me here is a humiliation I didn't deserve. Tom couldn't take it anymore. Mom, you stole from your granddaughter. How can you talk about humiliation when you've humiliated yourself?" Helen looked stunned, as if Tom's words had slapped her across the face. "I did it for you," she whispered, barely audible. "For me?" Tom was incredulous. "By stealing from my daughter. Mom, your logic is twisted." "It was to protect you. To protect our family from her," Helen said, pointing at me. "Protect from what, exactly?" I asked, my voice filled with a mix of frustration and curiosity. "From you. You're ruining my son, making him defy his own mother." Helen's voice cracked, showing her emotional fragility for the first time. "Your Honor, I think we've seen enough." Our lawyer interrupted, sensing that the situation was about to spiral out of control. The judge nodded. "I'm ready to make my verdict. Based on the evidence presented, it is clear that Mrs. Helen Williams is guilty of the charges brought against her." My heart leapt with a sense of vindication, but also sank knowing what this meant for our family. Helen was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to repay the stolen money. As Helen was led away, she turned to us, her eyes finally showing a glimmer of regret. "I'm sorry," she mouthed, before disappearing from our lives, possibly forever. Tom turned to me, his eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored my own. "I never wanted it to come to this, Sarah. Never." "Neither did I," I replied, embracing him tightly. "But we did what we had to do for the sake of our family." And so the confrontation came to an end, leaving behind a broken family and shattered relationships. But amid the debris, our little family unit stood strong, united more than ever by the trials we'd endured. As we walked out of the courtroom, I realized that while some battles leave you broken, others make you whole. And this was one battle that, although painful, had strengthened the bonds that truly mattered.